Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm so excited today because I'm joined by Hope Timberlake. Hope is a speaker, trainer, and the author of Speak Up, Dammit, and she's an expert about speaking in front of people and being confident while we do so. Welcome to the show, Hope.
Thanks so much, Erin. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Yeah, welcome to the channel. We're excited to bring everybody some ideas about the way speaking and writing kind of intersect and the way some of the skills we keep in mind are the same and some are different. So yeah, I'll start by asking Hope, as we started putting this together, what made you think it would be great to bring out a video on both speaking and writing? Why would we collaborate like this?
Right. So it's so interesting, as we all know from any type of work that we do, we need to be able to communicate out loud in a verbally, I guess you use words either way, but we need to be able to communicate out loud and communicate in writing. And there is so much overlap in those best practices, but also a lot that's different that we really need to keep in mind when we're translating writing to speaking or speaking to writing. So I thought this would be really fun for us to explore a few themes around writing and speaking.
Yeah, great. I agree, because so often when I'm in a workshop with business writers, just like you're in your presentations with business speakers, I get questions about the other one. I get questions like, well, I like writing this email in this way, but honestly, I think this topic might be better for a conversation. And so often we have to choose which venue or which media to use, spoken or written. So yeah, I agree. And so folks, Hope and I thought we would talk about some themes with you, and the idea is that writing and speaking are the same in some ways, but different in others. And we welcome your questions in the comments. We wanted to talk about how confidence comes into play for both, how we can be clear in either type of communication, and also how we would really work with our audience by bringing emotional intelligence. So we might not, perfectly go through those 1, 2, 3, but that's kind of what we're going to look at here. And I think maybe we could start with confidence, because I love everything I've seen about Hope's book, which you can see behind her, has really, to me, sounded like, how can people get confident about really showing up and using their voice? So how do you work with people on their confidence with speaking? And then we can see if it aligns with writing or not.
Right. So it is interesting, because when you're speaking, when you're preparing to speak, or when you're actually having the conversation, it's happening in real time. We've got to keep moving. We can't just hit pause or walk away from our computer and come back. And so there's that pressure that we put on ourselves to be a perfect communicator, prepare perfectly, and then deliver the message perfectly. And the key theme there is this emphasis on perfection, which I see in a lot of communicators, see it a lot in women, but frankly, across the board. And it's a disservice. There's a piece that we need to be perfect when we're planning and we're presenting, but in fact, that can really hinder us in the moment, because now we're in our heads focused on, what did I prepare? What did I want to say? Oh, it's not coming out the way I wanted it to come out, and really be introspective to the point of self-critical. So what I'm always working with people is on focusing externally on the audience member or the person you're communicating with, and also the big picture about the objective that you're trying to achieve. So when we can turn that mirror around and really think like, okay, what are my listeners going to benefit? Or how are they going to benefit? Or what will the impact be on them? Or how will my information be moving our objective forward? When we get that external focus, we can really get away from the self-critical tendency to be perfect, and just think, okay, it's really a conversation, and what will the impact, or what will the result of this conversation be for them?
Wow, I love that you brought up that external focus, because I actually advise writers similarly. almost exactly how you do. I say, think about your reader and think about your goal. And those are both outside ourselves, right? I often also remind us all, hey, folks, if you're not journaling or taking notes, you are not writing for you. We are almost never writing for ourselves, just like we're almost never speaking for ourselves. And so I agree, keep the focus outward, because like you said about the speaking pressure, I think writers feel also that perfection pressure unlike your folks, writers have more time, which is good and bad. We can excruciate, obsess, or we could maybe take the time to be careful. But writers, I think, feel that pressure that what they write might exist forever. Right. And that's a different kind of pressure too.
Right. How do you get your clients to move away from that maybe analysis paralysis phase of writing to actually being able to produce a document or produce an email that is actually living outside of their computer?
Right. Yeah, I know I think starting is the hardest part, just like getting up in front of a group. The beginning has always been the part where I notice how I'm feeling. With writers, I suggest that they jot down a couple of things. One, who am I writing for and what am I trying to accomplish? Readers and goals, to get that external focus, that clear sense of purpose. But then if they're also still like, okay, well, I know I'm writing to who I'm writing to, but what do I say? I encourage them to write down who, what, when, where, why in their notes, fill in the answers, make a sentence out of that. There's sentence number one. Basically, that says, what's happening, when is it happening, where is it happening? Because like you said, it's just about getting over the paralysis for people. But you also mentioned perfectionism, which I think is huge for why we're paralyzed. Writers feel like I'm going to be judged. And so they feel like they need to be perfect.
Well, I love it. That's a very simple but powerful way to get over that. If you can get started, then often you can continue. So I love that model that you suggested.
Yeah. And I also like to talk to people, and it's similar, I think, to your clients working with their audiences. There is not one correct way to write. And we don't need to punish ourselves for writing wrong, because there isn't something like that. We write in a way that's right for the situation.
Yes.
But not right across the board. So that can help a little too, I think.
Yeah. Let's dive into that later in our conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So when you're talking with your clients about confidence, you mentioned already, get outside of yourself, think about what you're trying to do. How do you help them understand and approach their audience? Especially if they're new speakers, how do they think that through, and how does that help them feel more confident potentially, or at least target their message better?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is around recognizing that our style is not necessarily the style of what our listeners want. So really paying attention and getting curious around, all right, so the people I'm talking to, maybe it's my manager. I'll give it an example of a real client where she really struggled with communicating with her manager, and she kept creating lots of information and data and support documents for their one-on-one meetings. And each time the manager was more curt, more short. And finally, we broke it down and said, let's talk about your manager. What does she want? And she's like, well, she's really busy. She's really short to the point. She doesn't even like the details. And so I need to provide them for her because she doesn't do them. And we took a step back and we thought, okay, well, what does she actually really need? So it can sound really obvious to you and me as we're sitting here not dealing with this situation.
Right.
But when you're new or you're junior or you're really eager to please, it's hard to remember or to even have the perspective or the knowledge to say, oh, somebody needs something different than what I'm providing. So let me get curious. Let me learn, listen, learn, observe, and then let me adapt.
All about curiosity, inquiry, us learning, writers and speakers learning about the situation, and then we can respond to it.
Yes.
Hope, it's so funny. I had the exact story from a client recently, but in writing. But it was the same thing. He was writing to his supervisor and trying to decide whether to include details. I love how your client, she thought, well, since my boss doesn't like doing details herself, I'll provide them. But then you thought, well, maybe she doesn't want details at all, at least right now. I had a writer in the same scenario, and he told us that he had made a mistake. He wrote to his supervisor. He had all these questions. In the end, he included all the details he wanted to about a project. He was giving her an update, and he included all the details. I said, well, why do you think, you did that? And he later said, well, she's a bottom line person, so I did the wrong call. She did not want all that. I know why I did it. I did it because I was proud of myself. I was proud of what I had done. So I gave her all the details in my update, but she didn't want them all.
Yeah. Well, yes. So we need to know our audience, though. If you're going to do it, I prefer that you do it because you're proud of yourself than because of fear. But
True.
yes, either way, it's not probably the best way to write or communicate out loud, but that's a cute story.
Yeah. Well, and both of the stories kind of remind me about the need for emotional intelligence in our speaking or writing, whether it's I think we often think about emotional intelligence about how do we be good to another person, right? Like, oh, I don't need details because they don't need them. But another side of emotional intelligence is that self-management and self-awareness. So even noticing, oh, I tend to be a little long-winded. It seems like I'm really excited about my project. Maybe I need to self-manage a bit before I write this.
Yes, exactly. And there may be another venue where your client or other people could share all the work that they did to get some of the props. And maybe it's even making their own little prop file in their email. They're not sharing it with anyone.
True.
But to your point, like we need to be paying attention to what our audience or readers need. And sometimes that's hard. We've talked about getting curious, but sometimes it's really hard to see it. So to your point, being self-reflective of like, what's the pattern here? Like if you can look back on your sent emails, I'm sure, and see what your pattern is. Sometimes you need to ask others when it comes to spoken communication, because we don't always have a good perspective on how we come across. One of the most common misconceptions that people have as it relates to spoken communication is they'll come to me and they say, I ramble. And the first thing I ask is, do you? And what we need to do, what happens, and we've all experienced this, is our brains are filled up with so many thoughts and so many ideas, and our synapses are moving quickly. So we have somewhere between 400 and 6,000 words popping through our brain every minute. So we get confused and we think that all those words are what our listeners are hearing. But we're only speaking 125, or if you're a New Yorker, an East Coaster, who's a fast communicator like I have been accused of being, maybe 150 words a minute. So you have 4 to hundreds of times more words in your brain than coming out of your mouth. So that fear that we're rambling is often unfounded. So as it comes to like circling back to the self-reflection, sometimes we need to either record and listen or ask for feedback and specific feedback around, am I rambling? Or am I being clear to my listeners? Am I targeting their needs? Otherwise, we don't necessarily have the ability to assess ourselves accurately.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds even like when we first say, oh, I'm rambling, we're also being a little judgy to ourselves, which won't help the confidence, because as you say, we might not be rambling.
Exactly. Yeah. We're our best, worst critics. We're the ones that we can come up with criticism for anything we do. So yeah, just getting some real clarity around it and some confidence around our abilities.
Well, and it's interesting because with a speaker, I really like your point. I can catch myself having done it many times. I'm mixing up the words that are here and the words that are here, just like we might forget whether we told a friend a story already because we've thought about the story so many times. But for writers, they tell me the same thing. They don't say I ramble, they say I'm fluffy. I go on and on with fluff words. But the difference with writing is you can see it right there. Where, so it's a little bit different, maybe a different way to sort of attack the fluff or the so-called rambling in that way. Yeah.
And Erin, I think there's another difference too, and I'm curious if you have seen this, where when we're speaking, sometimes people need to hear it a couple times in a couple different ways because they don't typically have the benefit of going back to reread it. And my guess is that when you're writing, you really do want to get rid of the fluff because you want to make sure they get the point quickly and they can go back and reread. Whereas when people are listening to their recordings, they say, see, I'm repeating myself. And sometimes I'll say, well, right, you're telling a new idea and you explain the new idea, you give some detail, and then you explain it in a different way. And that actually might be really beneficial to a new audience who's hearing it for the first time. So contextually, it can really make a difference if it's fluff or if it's actually instructional.
Well, right. And then your clients are perhaps reiterating information, sometimes even based on their listeners' facial expression, where you can say, oh, I clearly need to rephrase this because that didn't seem so clear according to their face. And so reiterating would be helpful, or as you said, sort of reframing, offering it from a few perspectives to make sure the message is received. But you're right, in writing, I do not encourage people to reiterate because yes, somebody could go back and reread. I think writers have the same worry. I've done it myself. I've written an email and at the end, I think, did I get my point across? And then I go, well, in case I didn't, let me add another paragraph. No. That's not what people want. It's our job as writers to actually go in and do the work and make sure it was clear the first time so that, because if we say it again, we're just increasing the possibility for confusion when it's written.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good point. Yes. Yeah. This is what I love about our this discussion is like all the similarities and then these very clear differences as well.
Well, right. And I think a lot of the strategies work for both, like some of the ideas that we've had. And so when we're talking about the idea of rambling or fluff, we're obviously worried about muddying our message. So maybe let's talk about clarity a little bit. How would we make sure that our message is not diluted, that even though we might be experiencing confidence issues and really wanting to make sure our audience gets everything they need, how can we kind of scale back and say, well, how do I just make sure that this is clear?
Right. So when I talk about spoken communication, I'll often have people think, all right, you're always going to be communicating to somebody who wants some version of the bottom line, because even if they're not a bottom line person, we're all so busy and we're diving into different meetings and different contexts. So it's helpful to provide that bottom line on top. Probably like you would recommend with, or I know you would recommend with writing as well. So having it there, but even for your really analytical listeners, you're now sharing, here's the bottom line, and then you're going to provide the detail later. So we always say like starting with the bottom line and then structuring your points into 2 or 3 bodies of information. So it might be that, and I do this a lot with spontaneous speaking, or we do an exercise and I might say, I might have someone ask me, Hope, tell me about your favorite vacation. And I'll say, well, my favorite vacation was in 2018 going to Hawaii. Right, so that's my bottom line. And I'll be like, there's 3 reasons, and then I talk about like the weather was perfect, the activities we did, and the people we were with. And then I go deeper into the weather, the activities, and the people, and then recap and be like, okay, so of course you can't control the weather, but if you can go to Hawaii and do these activities and go with your best friends, I guarantee you'll have an amazing trip. So some version of the age-old, tell them what you're going to tell them. Here's the bottom line. Here are the 3 areas I'm going to talk about. Tell them, details about the weather, details about activities, details about who you're with, and then tell them what you told them, which can feel very redundant to a speaker. But especially as the complexity of what you're sharing increases, it's vital. It's vital to have that version of clarity around your structure and bucketing of information.
Well, that's really interesting because it's reminiscent of the 5-paragraph essay, right? Where we say, hey, here's my main point or thesis. Here's what I'm going to say. Now I'm going to have 3 body paragraphs. Now I'm going to conclude. And I think for your clients, it's absolutely not redundant because listeners can't keep track of all that and remember every single time. For writers, though, it could be redundant because, as you said, we can go back and read. But I think that's one really important difference here, that when we know people are listening versus reading, what resources do they have to find out more? Listening, they might need it repeated because they don't have that resource to go back. But yeah, I love that because you're asking them to start with a preview, like here's going to be my main point, and then we'll talk about it. And I absolutely advise the same thing, that blot bottom line on top. And you're right, regardless of sort of personality or need, we all need to know the main thing. And we all need that main point right away. But with writing, I then have them explain it and reduce the sort of reiterating that we maybe grew up doing in school, because in business writing, people don't want to read an essay in their email. I guess another difference might be with writing, as much as we are making a clear point, maybe with our 5 W's, maybe otherwise, sometimes we're also asking for action and using a call to action to clarify what we want as well. Does that come up in speaking, that aspect of clarifying your point?
It does. And I think that that's where there is some nuance and really fine tuning your EQ around, like, are you chomping at the bit to make your request? Or are you the type of person who's sort of hesitant to do so and you're going to bury it, but your listeners need it? So it is very hard to advise one standard rule around that. I do like people to at least give a preview of, hey, I'm going to give you an update about the budget. And at the end, I need everyone's approval, or I need everyone to weigh in. Some preview about what's expected of your audience early. Particularly true in all the meetings we attend. I'm going to share 3 updates about what's happening with our recruiting team. And I want everyone to help me decide on how we should move forward. So some version of that right in the beginning, versus it's not always appropriate to say, hey, I need $650,000. Will you approve it right up front? But the big category of the request is useful to identify at the start.
That seems respectful and transparent at the beginning of a presentation. Like, here's what I'm doing, but part of my goal also includes you.
Yes.
I think that's the respectful thing to do. Yeah.
It's respectful and it's actually, frankly, practical and beneficial for the speaker, because guess what? We all know we've been on so many calls where the second a speaker talks, we're like, I'm going to go look at another screen. I'm going to look at, my Slack or do Wordle or whatever it is. But if you're told from the very beginning that you play a role in this, it's very helpful in your ability to influence their ability to listen to you and to participate in this, or to listen to your content.
Yeah, wonderful point. I totally agree. I suggest the same thing in an email, because so what I kind of got out of what you were saying there is that you need to let them know that they have a role so that they continue to find out how to do that role, i.e. listen. And in an email as well, I'll say, hey, if they have a role, they need to know in the first paragraph. I even advise indicate or hint at that role in your email subject line if you can, because it's fair, right? We need to know right away. And for writers, it's not that we're worried that they'll stop listening, but we are worried that they'll stop reading. And so again, we need to say up top, you've got a part in this, because otherwise they might think, I don't really need to read this. And then if we put a call to action at the end, what if they never got to the end?
Right.
Not going to happen.
Right, exactly. We're both competing. All of us are competing with so many other things. Was it the attention economy? You know,
Mhm.
we only have a finite amount of attention. So we need to help our listeners, and that will help ourselves or help our
Yeah.
readers too.
Great. Well, Hope, thank you for, we've been sharing a lot of great strategies. It's so fun to talk together since we work with clients in the same way, but in a different application.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the skills that work together. I will wrap up in a bit here, but as we've talked about these strategies, how can people find you and learn more about your work and your
Right.
advice and suggestions?
Well, you and I, Erin, we definitely are good on LinkedIn. So I always love engaging with people that way. It's Hope Timberlake, no relation to Justin Timberlake, sadly, but you can find me by my name, Hope Timberlake. And then if anyone has a specific question, put them in the comments. At the same time, you can also email me, hope@hopetimberlake.com.
Yeah, great. And I confess I did wonder when I first met you if there was a
Right.
relation.
Most people
Now I
do.
know. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, high value writers out there, you can reach out to Hope too. And you can ask us both questions by putting a comment, because we want to help you write and speak with confidence, clarity, and emotional intelligence. And we've got you covered from the speaking and the writing angle. So many thanks, Hope. Anything else you wanted to leave us with as we sign off here?
No, I just think that thinking about every way in which you communicate will be helpful for your future business success. And I love collaborating with you, Erin. This is great.
Likewise, lots of fun. So thank you to Hope, and thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye.